Hey guys, Lost here, and today we are talking about Crusader Kings 3, a game which, in my opinion, is one of the best Paradox games out there to date, and I've spent way too much time playing Paradox games, and I mean that in the best way possible. In my opinion, Crusader Kings 3 just scratches that strategy game itch in a way that most others don't. So with that, let's talk about 3 massive overhaul mods that only add to hundreds and hundreds of hours of potential gameplay experience. First, let's kick it off with something weird and a little fantastical. This fantasy conversion known as the Lord of the Kings has almost 20,000 subscribers on Steam. And no, it's not the Lord of the Rings, but it's clearly inspired by it. This mod adds dozens and dozens of different races, houses, factions, religions, and just about everything else you can think of. This mod takes place across Europe in its own fantasy timeline, but rather than being dominated by humans, it's dominated by all sorts of different races of mystical creatures. The current fantasy races are High Elf, Wood Elf, Shadow Elf, Dwarf, Orc, Goblin, Gnome, Fae, and Ogres, with many more being planned to add in. Each one of these races dominate different areas of the map, and they all have a whole host of different attributes and religions. For example, you have the Runic religion, mostly followed by the Dwarves, and naturally it promotes feasting, drinking, and all around good times. Then you have the Alvani, which is there to honor the High Elves. Now I'm sure if you are like myself, with all of these races intermingling and with secession being a fairly big part of the game, what does marriage and offspring look like? Well, I decided to give a character 200% fertility, and I tried to mix things up. So I made an orc character and I married him off to this thing. And this was the outcome. What on earth is that monstrosity? Oh my gosh, I don't even want to know what it's going to grow up and look like. That's awful. Ha! Needless to say, it changes a couple things around. So if you are ever bored and want to go on a little bit of a fantasy adventure through Crusader Kings 3, I would highly recommend checking this mod out on Steam. Up next, we are going to keep it a little bit in the weird and fantastical realm with a mod called Princes of Darkness. This mod is a successor to the Princes of Darkness mod for CK2, and it's made by the same team. This mod is obviously a complete overhaul of the base game, and Princes of Darkness brings the history of Europe that was ruled by humans into the world of vampires. However, rather than making up things that have never happened and never existed, it tries to tie in this world to what's actually happened throughout European and human history. In Princes of Darkness, much of the world now is ruled over by many different vampire families and houses, many of whose lineages span hundreds and even thousands of years back, each of them with extensive lore and detail. One starting character, for example, is Mithras, who is once believed to be a Roman god due to his heritage dating all the way back to his life in ancient Rome. Yes, that's right, these vampires are in fact immortal. Mithras eventually fled to England after his failed business dealings, and that is currently where his power resides. Next, you have an iconic person in history who is Petanike, who was once the wife of Philip II of Macedon and the mother to Alexander the Great. Just because the life of immortality did not bestow itself on her son does not mean she can't keep things kicking. Finally, another historical character you may have heard of is Helena of Troy, who is now a vampire, and many consider her to be the most beautiful woman in the world, and even wars have been started over her beauty. However, simply changing the starting characters does not quite qualify to be an overhaul mod if it didn't change many other facets of the game as well. Like I said, these vampires are immortal, meaning they will not die by old age. However, they can be killed by burning them at the stake or lopping off their heads. Another large game changer is the fact that marriage no longer results in offspring. So really, marriages are more for political reasons in this mod. A new addition to the game is also an entirely new skill tree. Yes, you still have the normal ones, but you now have new vampire-based skills as well. You have a skill called Animal or Animism, which has to do with intrigue and is centered around shapeshifting. You have Choleric, which has to do with prowess and strength. You have Melancholy, which is much more aligned again with intrigue, shadows, and death. You have Phlegmatic, which has to do with learning and the heightening of your senses. You also have Sanguine, which is much more closely aligned to the martial skill and sorcery. Vampires, by the way, also learn much slower than the average human, oddly enough. Out of all of the Overhaul mods that I've seen, this one is probably the most expansive that you can really sink your teeth into. I know it's kind of maybe not as aligned with some people because it is around vampires, but nonetheless, if you're into any kind of fantasy or conversion mods, this is definitely the one for you. Finally, we are moving on to the third one, which we are finally straying away from the magic and the fantasy side of things, more towards a practical historical mod. This mod is the Bronze Age, which gives you two different starting dates way back in time, starting at 2115 BCE or 1590 BCE. The Bronze Age brings you back to the heart of Western civilization with places like Greece, Athens, Egypt, and the pharaohs. It brings up things like mythology, the oracles. It can go on and on. This third mod is not quite as expansive as the Princes of Darkness, but it is definitely a change of pace, especially since it's no longer centered around Western Europe. Though it is still under development, the Bronze Age has 45,000 subscribers on Steam, and though they still have some new character models to add in and some of the units aren't quite finished, it is still one of the few solid conversion mods out there. If you look at the Bronze Age Steam page, they still plan on adding a whole lot of new features. And like many other time periods, this time period was filled with warring empires, thriving civilizations, tribes in the sand, and a whole host of their own beliefs and mythology. The Bronze Age is definitely a change of pace and a change of scenery away from the men-at-arms, the knights in shining armor, the cloaked figures in the night during the Dark and Middle Ages, and brings it down to the sands, the heat, the glistening spears and shield walls of the Mediterranean. Now, I know we did just cover 3 Overhaul mods, but I did want to add in an honorable mention that is still under construction, but I am very excited for, mostly due to the time period it's set in. This mod is called the Fallen Eagle, and despite it not even being released yet, it still has 8,000 current subscribers on Steam, myself being one of them. The Fallen Eagle begins at 395 and goes up to 867, beginning at the official division of Rome all the way up until Charlemagne himself. Now the history nerd in me is coming out. The last 80 or so years of the Western Roman Empire is one of the vastly underappreciated time periods in history, because in all reality, it was one of the last times or the last time that Rome controlled all of its normal territory. Within a decade, Rome would begin to lose territory that it would never get back. And again, this is the history nerd in me coming out. I have a particular fascination with General Flavius Stilicho, who was the patriarch over Emperor Honorius as a child at the time. General Flavius Stilicho was considered one of the last great Roman generals and one of the last true Roman generals. Flavius Stilicho, despite facing insurmountable odds throughout his entire life, saved the empire on numerous occasions. He fended off barbarian tribes constantly and kept the powers that be in check through an ornate web of alliances throughout his lifetime. However, despite all that, General Stilicho was put to death in a coup d'etat against him by his political opponents. What's most notable about him was even when he was put to death, he willingly accepted it despite the protests of his own loyal followers. He was always in service to the empire he defended. So with that, I think we are coming to the end. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and you got a little bit of value out of it, and you have a few more mods to hopefully go and look up. So thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. Subscribe for more content like this, and I will see you guys later.